Hello, CRE 101 students. This screencast covers chapters 9 and 10 of Sherry Diesler's Becoming a Critical Thinker. These are the last two chapters in the last screencast for this course. Yay! You made it! I'm so excited for you and for the end of this course. The information is quite valuable. So chapter 9 is where we'll start, and it covers fair-mindedness. The learning objectives are thinking about the defense mechanisms that cloud our thinking, the effect of conformity on critical thought, rational approaches to emotional reasoning, points of logical vulnerability, and the active listening techniques that foster open-mindedness and empathy. So fair-mindedness, in short, is a respect for people whose ethnicities and traditions are different from our own. And it's a willingness to hear and understand other people's viewpoints. And it's also an openness to change when new information or insight warrants that change. So when we think fair-mindedly, we listen, we hear, we take other viewpoints into consideration, and we just don't steamroll ahead or bully ahead with our thoughts and viewpoints. This can be tricky at times because sometimes our beliefs are so strongly held that we can't be fair-minded. This is where time and patience and processing and gathering evidence can be helpful. But even after we do those things, we can still arrive at our original conclusion, which in fact makes you a better critical thinker because you've gone through the processes of fair-mindedness and still have arrived at your original beliefs. So one of the things that gets in the way of fair-mindedness, and there's quite a bit in this chapter on this topic, is egocentrism. And it's in its core definition, it's a tendency to view everything else in relationship to oneself. One's desires, values, beliefs, and actions seem to be self-evidently correct or superior to those of others. And I like to think of adolescent egocentrism, which is sort of a later theory on egocentrism. Jean Piaget, who's a developmental psychologist, who's still incredibly relevant to education and child development, came up with the concept, or theorized the concept, of egocentrism. And really studied it quite deliberately to allow people who studied children to understand their beliefs in relation to themselves and to the world. But I like to think of adolescent egocentrism more thoroughly, because you can encounter this in college quite a bit, especially in the beginning years of college. So at a two-year college like Chandler Gilbert Community College, we tend to encounter quite a bit of adolescent egocentrism. And it's those individuals in your small groups or in your classes who cannot yet see themselves in relation to the world in a way that's going to help them develop as adults and mature as adults. So lots of times we get teenagers in Chandler Gilbert College, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds, even up to the early 20s, who were still in the developmental stage of adolescent egocentrism. So just think about that in relation to yourself and in the relation to your peers in your classes that you work with. And here's a longer definition of adolescent egocentrism, Elkind termed after Piaget, and the reference of where I found that from. You can go to that site and read more and look at more examples of that. Another thing that causes problems is ethnocentrism or sociocentrism. And that's a tendency to view one's own race or culture as the center. And it's typically based on the deep-seated belief that one's own group is superior to others. Very dangerous. And here's a little cartoon discussing American ethnocentrism or American sociocentrism, right? And At the end of the chapter, there's a bunch of recommendation of films and media that cover these ideas. But as I was reflecting and reading this chapter, I couldn't help but think of a film that was really transformative and very impactful on my life, and it's called American History X. And if you've ever seen it, or if you look it up and just look at the plot, it is about ethnocentrism, about a group of young men who are neo-Nazis in America, and one, whoa, sorry about that, and one who chooses to stop that. And it's really an incredibly powerful movie that centers on ethnocentrism and sociocentrism. Quite violent, so viewer beware. So just remember that it's okay to take strong or even immovable stance on issues. But those strong stands need to be thought out carefully and honestly regarding the relevant factors involved in an issue. However, we don't also want to be so open-minded that we have no core beliefs or opinions at all. So if you feel yourself being really open-minded, you're working in a small group, you feel like you're being steamrolled or bullied to believe or take certain stands about things, take a moment to listen, step back, reflect, maybe wait till the next time that group gets together, and put yourself in the perspective of, am I being immovable on this issue, or have I thought carefully and honestly regarding all these relevant factors and still feel the need to bring up this position or case? It's a good way to take time to develop and not only become a strong listener, but also become a strong employee or student who's working in small group situations. So moving on in this idea of egocentrism, there's a couple of ways, and the chapter goes in this in great detail, of how we defend our egos. So when our egos are challenged, our minds immediately go into rationalization, almost always. It's our way of justifying or making sense of things that don't make sense. And a theory that is relative to this idea is this theory of cognitive dissonance, a theory of why we rationalize so much. And the theory suggests that as humans, we have an inner drive. This is nature, not nurture, to hold our attitudes and beliefs in harmony to avoid disharmony or dissonance. Our minds don't like to be out of sync, so we rationalize to help. Again, reflecting on that one film, American History X, I also think it's a great example of cognitive dissonance when the main character goes through this shift from being a neo-Nazi to no longer being a neo-Nazi, and when he encounters that disharmony and that dissonance, and it really centers around it and centers around his efforts to pull a relative, I believe it was his brother, out of those ideas and into ideas of harmony and other beliefs, more healthy beliefs. So you may have encountered cognitive dissonance at the time. I think cognitive dissonance and adolescent egocentrism really go together. I see a lot in my students, specifically younger students, where they're starting to test those boundaries and have changes and become on the fence about ways in which they believe and how they put themselves at the center. And when we have that disharmony and that dissonance, it can be uncomfortable. It can be frightening even, and I find it interesting to think about those things as you might have in your own experiences. And then, of course, we have denial, our repression or refusal to recognize any negative or threatening information. So here's a couple of examples, humorous examples, of course, of denial, but your chapter covers denial as well. And then finally, conformity. Not finally, excuse me, second to last, conformity. A lot by Cialdini in the chapter about the idea of conformity, strength in numbers, strength in thinking in numbers, cults, and cult thinking lands in this idea quite a bit. And then some ways we can overcome conformity, realizing that we have a tendency to accept broad beliefs of an attitude or action, understand that we work in groups, and being aware of the idea of groupthink, basing decisions on good evidence and reasoning instead of conforming to the group or rebelling against the group. And when you're working in groups, suggesting to brainstorm ideas, to bring in outside experts, having an impartial leader establish and keep an open climate that can also encourage discussion and alternatives. But also recognize that we have some points of logical vulnerability, a difficulty in being objective, sore spots in our thinking. This goes back to core values and core beliefs when we come full circle in this course, that we just arrive at, and we're unshaken and immovable from those beliefs. Some people may think this as points of logical vulnerability. And then finally, the art of listening. And the chapter discusses how some psychologists believe that the ability to listen to another person, to empathize, and to understand their points of view is perhaps one of the highest forms of intelligent behavior. And it's very difficult to cultivate and very difficult to do. So the more we practice it, the more intelligent we can behave in groups and in groupthink. And then Chapter 10 covers persuasive thinking, and hopefully most of you, this is a review. Ethos, logos, and pathos are the three elements of a persuasive argument. If you have taken English 101 or 102, you may have encountered these formulas in your writing. And just real quickly, ethos is the credibility of the speaker, and the image, belief, and reputation of the speaker. Right speaker for the right audience. Logos is the logical appeal that a writer or speaker uses, made through use of good evidence. They use a strong organizational format in their speech, in their writing. And then finally, pathos, which is the emotional appeal that a speaker uses to appeal to the listener's emotions, but only when it's appropriate and relevant to the issue. So not the kind of fallacious pathos or appeal to emotion in fallacies that we reviewed a couple of chapters ago, but making the issue real to the audience, the human impact, but using all three together is what makes effective persuasive speaking. And if you click on this link after, we're at the end of this video, this screencast, so if you click on this link, it's a TED Talk by one of my favorite thinkers. I'm really into graphic novels and comics and the visual and visual literacies. So this is a TED Talk that I use in other iterations of my CRE 101 course. And he's talking about the visual magic of comics. And a lot of the information is pretty sophisticated, but what I love about his TED Talk is that it's an excellent example of an orator, somebody giving a speech, who's using all three. He's using ethos because he's incredibly credible, right? He's a cartoonist, he's a thinker, he's written a book called Understanding Comics, so he's got credibility. The logical flow of the speech is just quite effective. And then the emotional appeal. He uses a lot of humor, which a lot of speakers do in TED Talks, to really connect with his audience at different times. So if you take a moment to look at that, it's just a great example of public speaking. So good luck at the end of this chapter, and if you have any questions, I'll see you on the flip side in emails and on Canvas.